A Nebraska mother gives a passionate plea to lawmakers this afternoon. She wants the penalty for motor vehicle homicide to match the penalty if it also involves the death of an unborn child.
Right now, the two differ. Motor vehicle homicide carries a maximum sentence of 0 to 20 years. For an unborn child, the penalty is 0 to 3 years.
First Alert 6 investigator Brian Mastry explains why it means so much for this parent to change this.
Zachary Paulison is 2 years into his 16-year sentence for motor vehicle homicide times 3. He had spent the evening at 2 Elkhorn bars before getting behind the wheel of his work truck in March 2022. He hit the victim's car going 102 miles per hour. Amanda Shook didn't have a chance. Neither did her best friend, Sarah Zimmerman. Sarah was 8 months pregnant.
Brooks was just a couple weeks away from being born. He wasn't just a fetus, he was a little baby boy. His skull was fractured, and he, along with Sarah and friend Amanda, were burned beyond recognition.
If alive, Brooks would have called her grandma today. She channeled some of that pain to help other families who may be in the same position one day.
It's one of those laws you don't see it a lot.
Ryan Lindbergh, Deputy County Attorney in Douglas County, says this is one of the times when he can't explain to victims' families why the punishment is different between the mother and the unborn child.
I can't help but wonder what the judge would have done if he had the ability to impose a sentence between 1 and 20 years. Would justice have felt more attainable? Would the punishment better reflect the gravity of taking Brooks' life?
I'm Brian Mastry reporting, First Alert 6.
Such a sad story to report tonight. Now, in this particular case, the maximum sentence carries a 43-year prison sentence. If the changes were adopted, though, it would come with a 60-year maximum.